Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Hahn, and this is episode 42 of Guided Self-Healing, Fearless Living. And this episode is called The Nature and Importance of Patterns, which is in our book, it's chapter 6. And I want to just give you an overview of why patterns are important and what patterns are. So, what are patterns? Patterns are universal themes that play out over and over and over again. We hear them in myth, we hear them in our lives, but they're themes and they're sort of like fractal in nature, which is that they have an underlying theme and then they build out in terms of the content of them. But the underlying theme upon which all of that is based is the same, even though the surface may look different. Um, so a pattern is anything that is thematic in nature and which you will see holds an awful lot of different symptoms in them for reasons that are clear because the underlying nature of the pattern is the theme, and then all kinds of beliefs or feelings or boundary issues or physical problems can play out in these patterns if they're traumatized. So um, So that's essentially what they are. And why they're important is often we'll have some kind of problem. And we think that the problem is really the problem, but it's not really the problem. It's a symptom of a deeper problem. And so if you work directly on the symptom, you'll get some relief, but you won't get as much relief as if you could find the underlying cause. And there are a couple of metaphors that I think are useful for this. The one I use because I'm in the Northeast and because it showed up one day for me is like, if you think about an ice dam, if you know about ice, some of us deal with it all winter, and you have a gutter on your roof, and there's a problem with that, and you have water coming down in different streams in your wall. You might think that the water is the problem. You could call the water, your OCD and your ADHD and your chronic pain and whatever. But what you might not know, of course, is that there is an ice dam in a roof that you didn't even know existed. And sort of like when something happens and something triggers it, the water comes down being all these symptoms, but in fact, they're not the problem. You clean up the water and then it comes back. You say, well, why did it come back? I cleaned it up. And it's because you didn't know there was a roof. You didn't know there was a gutter. You didn't know there were ice dams. So you don't have the name for the problem. You just see you have a name for the symptom of the problem, right? So that's what it's like. Or a different metaphor would be, let's suppose you have a lot of houses you want to build, right? This one's more generic. And underneath all of those houses, there's a foundation and there's a crack in the foundation. Well, of course, you can try to work on the house, but if you haven't taken care of the crack in the foundation, the house will not, it won't stay up. It'll be weak and it won't have a good foundation. So you'd have to take care of the foundation. And sometimes then you have to work on the house, but sometimes the only problem is the foundation. And when you take care of the foundation, amazingly, the houses are easy to work on because the only problem with the house was that there was the crack in the foundation. And sometimes you're just working on one house and underneath it, there's a foundation and it has a crack in it. So like that will give you a clue to what the problem with that house is, using all these metaphors. So sometimes you have to work on a pattern first. Well, let me give you, there are three possibilities. One possibility is the most important thing to work on is the pattern. So you have these symptoms, but you have this pattern. It's affecting all the things you're thinking is the problem, and it's affecting other things you haven't even thought of at all as being related to the problem, because it never occurred to you that all these different things all were about one theme, and they all were enfolded into that theme. So that's one possibility. The second possibility is you have to do something about the pattern first. It's like it's a predisposition, you could say. It's like if you don't take care of the pattern before you take care of the house, then the house will be weak. So you have to do something and then you can work on the house. And sometimes if you take care of the pattern, it's an exact replica. I mean, it's sort of like the house and the foundation are all one thing, and it gives you a clue about what's going on that's keeping your house from being built. So you can use patterns in all kinds of different ways. So that's why we have them, is because it will tell you a theme, right? That's one reason you have them. It will tell you what you might need to do about something, because if the problem is betrayal, then you might have to make amends. Or if the problem is, unfinished death, you might have to go through a death process. I mean, so some of these patterns built into them sort of intrinsically are the way you resolve them. And so you hear a theme, you'll know there's a pattern there, or it'll tell you what to do, or sometimes it will help you go deeper into some problem because you may not have been aware of the theme. So you can use these patterns in all kinds of different ways. Now, in our work called life-centered therapy, we've identified three basic categories of patterns. One of them, and we're going to go through each of them in subsequent podcasts because this is an overview. One of them we call single center patterns. And single center patterns are traumas that affect one of our three centers: our head, which is about beliefs; our heart, which is about our feelings; and our bellies, which is about our boundaries and sometimes about our literal bodies. So, um, when you have a trauma to one of those three things, then you're kind of in a compulsion. So what we're of course looking for, which we'll talk about more later, is you want your beliefs to be aligned with what you know. You want your feelings to be appropriate in the context, and you want to be able to experience them and be a choice about expression. And of course, with boundaries, you want to have choice about what goes in and what comes out. And if you're traumatized, none of those things are true. And we're going to, as I said in our next podcast, we'll talk about that in more detail. Then there are what we call triple center patterns. um, and they're themes or universal themes that affect all three of these centers. So you'll have some kind of theme, and it will affect your beliefs, it will affect your feelings, it will affect your boundaries. And literally one pattern and your particular variation of that pattern can create all kinds of different things that if you worked on them separately would take forever, and you wouldn't be that effective anyway because you'd be working on the symptom and not on the problem. So that's the second category, is these universal themes, and some of them we say come in the material realms, which we'll talk about, and that just means you can experience them through your five senses. Even if you're in a mythic story or another lifetime and your head gets cut off, you can experience that through your five senses. You can see the guillotine coming down, and then you can know what happened. But non-material patterns are themes that are not in sort of normative Western reality, however you want to make sense of them, because we just care if they're useful, not if they're literally true or not. That's up to you, because what you believe is your business. But there's stories of curses, or there's stories of dark energies that people can't see that take you over, or there's stories of abductions from aliens or anything like that. They're not in what we said normative Western reality is. And whatever you want to think of them, if you heal them and they make your life better, then that's great. And then the third category we call them identity patterns. And really what we call them that, although it's true for all of these things, is when you have an identity pattern, what you're focusing on is not the trauma itself, but the way we protect ourselves from ever experiencing it again, which creates a very limited identity, because we believe we are the protector, and the protector comes at some great cost, because it keeps you from experiencing your authentic self, because you believe if you really were who you truly were, you'd get annihilated. So you say, that's a bad idea, so I'm going to protect myself in some kind of way that limits me, but at least make sure I never end up in the situation that got me stuck in the first place. So let's see why pattern is important. And we have an example of this in the book, which I will just repeat. But you can get a sense of it, and it's fun to read it, and it's fun to hear it this way, and it's you can hear it in all kinds of different ways, and you can extrapolate. So let's take one symptom, which is a panic attack, and this is what we spell out for you. And so let's say you have a panic attack in my office because a motorcycle backfires. Now, if we're going to work directly on that, what I would, of course, say to you is, when you're having a panic attack, I'd say, well, what's happening in the body as you're having panic attack? And you might say, oh, my heart's pumping fast. So, of course, then I would say, well, what you're going to do is you're going to bring all your attention to someone whose name is heart pounding fast because it's the one who's having the panic attack, and we can work on it directly. And so you're going to choose to bring all your awareness. And so you become aware of, you allow, you bring all your attention to, and you accept heart pounding fast. Then you're going to ask heart pounding fast, what have you come to share about panic? And it might say, I'm a soldier in a war, and bombs are going off near me, and I can't handle this, and I'm having a panic attack right now. And so, of course, you get stuck in that moment. And then when the motorcycle backfires 20 years later, you have no perspective and you're still living out the war. And as soon as, of course, you choose to become the body sensation, then you no longer unconsciously identify with heart pounding fast, but you consciously identify with the one who is choosing to be heart pounding fast and then bearing witness and holding it, sort of like an actor who's now saying, heart pounding fast isn't who I am. It's just a role I'm playing, and I'm going to be with whoever that is. And that would be no pattern there. That would just be a direct relationship between the sound and the memory. And you could go directly from the motorcycle backfiring to the bombs going off. And that's the problem, is the bombs going off and your reaction to it. So it's an exact parallel process. But let's take a different example with the same symptom. Motorcycle backfires, you have a panic attack. But this time, that's not the problem. That's a symptom of a deeper problem. And we can determine that problem. Let's say we determine it's betrayal. And so I say, that your reaction to the sounds going off might get you to what the real story is, but there's a quicker way, which is we've determined that the problem is betrayal. And let's suppose then I have you focus on betrayal and not just the sounds. The sounds are a symptom, so that's part of it. You can focus on that, but you're also going to focus on I betrayed a trust. And when you say I betrayed a trust, then you feel throat closing up and you feel this inexplicable pain in your foot. Okay, so we still have your heart pounding fast, perhaps, but we also have two other symptoms that you wouldn't have found necessarily. One being tightness and throat closing up, that sensation, and the other being pain in foot. Now let's suppose we're going to have you bring all your attention to the one who said I betrayed a trust, whose other name is tightness in throat and pain in foot. When you become there, you say, oh my goodness, um, have fun with this, okay? We'll make it a different, same kind of scenario, but slightly different. Let's say you say, this is funny, I'm wearing this strange uniform. I think I'm in World War One, and I'm leading a group of troops, and I'm not paying, I'm distracted, and I should be paying more attention. And suddenly, because I wasn't paying attention, I walked them into an ambush, and I am watching the bombs go off, and my men are dying, and I'm feeling incredibly guilty about it, and I'm sort of wishing that I were the one who was dying and not them, because I feel like I didn't protect them the way I was supposed to as the leader. And I'm cursing the fact that I'm a leader and I don't want to be a leader anymore. So I watch what's happening to all of them, and I can't stand it. And in a moment, in an impetuous moment, I shoot myself in the foot so that I'll be wounded, as a way of assuaging my guilt and as a way of getting out of the battlefield, so I don't have to be a leader anymore, or whatever it is. And then they come and find me and they bring me to the hospital or something. Let's suppose that's the story. Now we're going to see, of course, that you're in a very different relationship with the motorcycle backfiring now, because the problem isn't that you couldn't handle the bombs going off because of your fear. The problem is you couldn't handle it because of your feeling so ashamed or something about the fact that you betrayed all these men, and that you believe that you should be dead or something. So if we could then say, okay, your real problem this time isn't just your trauma because of the bombs going off, and you have that kind of trauma, the war, but your trauma is very different. Look at what might be associated with that, which you would never have thought they all had the same thing. Suppose not only, and you didn't even mention these things because, motorcycle backfires and you're aware of your panic attacks and you want to work on the panic attacks, but it never occurred to you. You also have obsessive compulsive disorder and you have this strange fear that if you're not paying total attention and doing everything right and not missing any details, it's like something horrific will happen. And you also have attention deficit disorder, but not just attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, but you also have some kind of guilt about the fact that you can't pay enough attention. And you also have this strange limp in your foot because, you had an accident and something very heavy fell on your foot and they said, you shouldn't still be in so much pain, but you're still in a lot of pain and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And you also tell me that you hate being in roles of leadership. And you say, every time I get near being in a role where I get to lead, I shoot myself in the foot, metaphorically speaking. And, there could be all kinds of other things that are associated with it. So let's say you have strange feelings whenever you come into anything that reminds you of where this took place, for reasons that made no sense to you, right? So if it happened in the woods, you might have fear of woods. There could be, in one of these situations, my colleague and I counted 263 different potential problems that came out of one betrayal. We could do the same thing here. It's really quite extraordinary because all of them get unfolded into that one story. So they all can balance if you can take care of that. And that's the only reason they're there, which often is the case. So, of course, in this case, we're going to find out that the reason this person still has their pain and their limp isn't because of the accident that happened in this lifetime. In fact, the accident that happened in this lifetime could just be a unconscious reliving of what happened in World War One. And it wouldn't have been an accident at all. It would have been sort of like something that you chose unconsciously, subconsciously or unconsciously to bring into your life as a way to help you master this other story. But of course, you wouldn't know that. You would just think you were a victim of fate as opposed to co-creating a destiny on a soul level. And it's really quite extraordinary that, and you'd say, well, I shoot myself in the foot every time I want leadership. And you'd think that you were speaking metaphorically, like, I shoot myself in the foot. But that would literally be, of course, an indication of what's going on here because you betrayed a trust. You literally shot yourself in the foot and you play that out over and over and over again. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is if those are the primary reason all those symptoms are there and you find a way to make amends for your betrayal, which there are various kinds of practices of forgiveness you might be able to do, and you can let go of this sense of I betrayed a trust, which you may have been playing out, your fear of betraying trust all over the place, or you may have people betray trust with you, and that could be just I wanted to know what it was like to be those soldiers that I wasn't paying enough attention to, and you could find that in this lifetime, you get yourself into situations and people betray you, and it would be just like, I wanted to find out what the other side was. All of those things could be unfolded into this one enormous theme. So, this is why pattern is important. And we all, of course, know about pattern because there's some very famous patterns. The most famous probably is what we call the Oedipal. The Oedipal is just a pattern. Freud said it was a universal pattern. I actually don't think it's the only universal pattern. I think it is a pattern, and I think it spoke something about the nature of his personality, which I think, had all the joys and beauties of somebody who, saw the world as being, a place of a lot of doubt. Now he comes up with this universal pattern, right? What is it? If you take the Oedipal, if you know the Oedipal story, myth, but also his understanding of it, well, you can hierarchically bring it down to one theme, which is I have this wish, right? This unacceptable wish, which in this case, in his story, would be if I'm a young boy, I want my mother, and I literally want her, erotically, I want to possess my mother, but I have a problem, which is that I have a father, and he's going to know, he's going to be able to read my thoughts, and, he's going to punish me in the most horrific of ways, according to Freud, which would be physical, violence, so that I won't be his rival anymore. And so what I have to do is I have to deny my wish, and I have to identify with him and be like him, and then find someone like my mother, but not have my mother. Now, of course, if that works out and there's no trauma around it particularly, it will get resolved, and you will, in a psychoanalytic way, you'll resolve it and you will not be neurotic. But of course, if there's trauma around it, let's suppose that your mother and father are having a bad relationship, and your mother kind of eroticizes her relationship with you, and your father, gets clearly you and he have a lot of fights, and you don't realize, well, why that's happening, but it's the playing out of a traumatic version of this, a compulsive version. It can play out in all kinds of symptoms, right? Problems with authority, problems in relationships, problems with sexuality, you know, sabotaging any relationship that you are coming into. Literally, you might get sick whenever you think about, going on a date where you think you might be having sex. I mean, there all kinds of symptoms would come out of it, but really what it would be an unresolved pattern. And if you could heal the pattern and heal the triangular dynamic, because it's a triangular pattern, all of those things go away. So what can we say? I mean, it's like knowing about pattern is really powerful, and being able to determine if you're stuck in one of them and that your symptoms are really symptoms of a deeper pattern as opposed to the actual problem you need to work on can really, make your healing work more effective and more efficient. Now, of course, if you don't know about these things, you'll get there. It's just a question of how quickly and how elegantly you do it. But if you're aware of it, if you're aware of pattern, then the worlds open up, because now you've heard this. So it's like, I wonder if I'm in some kind of theme. And we'll go through all of them, what these potential patterns is in a subsequent podcast. But at least now there's something to look for. So thank you very much for listening. And again, I'm doing this, our 42nd podcast, this nature and importance of pattern. It's on March 31st, 2022. Our book comes out on April 5th. Probably by the time you listen to this, it will have come out. And please buy it. It's called The 1 Hour Miracle. But really what the miracle is when you become more aware and more free. And that's really miraculous, because anything you do that makes you more free from suffering and more choice in the world is truly a miracle. And meanwhile, if you want to be in touch with me, you can do that easily. It's Ahan at lifecenteredtherapy.com. And if you want to know more about us and our online trainings and our live trainings, or more about our book or anything, you can just go, of course, to lifecenteredtherapy.com. And I always love hearing from you. I love your comments. I love your reflections. I love your questions. I love you think if I'm, think what I'm saying is crazy, because I love skeptics. I love it all. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. And when you're doing your own healing work, just ask, am I in some kind of theme? Betrayal, neglect. I believe something that isn't true. I feel like I've been taken over. I'm protecting myself because if I was who I really am, it's too dangerous. Start asking, worlds open up. And I invite you to open to all of these worlds, because everything is possible. So until our next time, I wish you happy healing and happy evolving, and a wonderful